Let this town hear me clear. I'll take them both, and I'll pay in full, because no law makes slavery right. Rust Creek's square shimmered under brutal heat. Children pressed behind railings. Women whispered behind gloves. Men counted coins with greedy eyes. The widow trembled, holding her baby like a shield. Then came the echo hoofbeats like drums of war. Dust parted to reveal a figure out of legend. A giant cowboy, scar down his face, boots heavy on the boards. He did not haggle. He laid gold and promise together. Stay here, because this story will ask you, when justice sleeps, who dares wake it with their fist? The summer sun beat down on Rust Creek, Wyoming, flattening the town beneath its merciless glare. Dust rose from wagon wheels and boots, hanging thick as smoke. The clapboard buildings looked tired, their paint blistered and peeling. At the heart of Main Street, a rough platform had been nailed together, 4 planks balanced on whiskey barrels. A place for speeches, a place for punishment. Today, a place for selling human beings. The crowd pressed close, murmuring. Men in sweat-stained shirts leaned on rifles. Women clutching baskets from the market pulled children behind them. Yet even the children sensed the wrongness. A boy, no older than 8, tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, why are they selling a lady?" His mother hushed him sharply, eyes darting to the banker in black. On the platform, Hannah Miller stood clutching her baby. Sam was 6 months old, too young to know why his mother trembled. His small fists clung to the faded blue of her dress. Hannah's bonnet slipped back, dark hair damp on her cheeks. She tried to stand straight, but the weight of 100 eyes bore her down. Boots shifted on the boards. Sweat slid between her shoulder blades. She smelled dust, horse sweat, the sour tang of beer leaking from the Silver Eagle saloon across the street. Tobias Clay, the banker, stepped forward. His black coat shone with pressed severity, a silver chain swinging from his vest. His voice rang out sharp and thin. "Folks, as executor of Patrick Miller's estate, it falls to me to settle his debts. Substantial debts. Before you stands his widow and her child." He paused, letting the words sink like stones. "A strong young woman. Knows cooking, sewing, cleaning. Healthy boy. Good stock. Together they'll serve well. Bidding starts at $50. The crowd shifted. Some gasped, others looked away. No one spoke against him. Clay's pale eyes swept the square like a hawk's daring challenge. None came. Hannah's stomach hollowed. $50. Less than a mule. Less than a new Winchester at the Mercantile. She tightened her hold on Sam, whose soft whimper turned to fretful crying. "50," called a ranch hand, grinning at his friends. "I'll pay that just to have her scrub floors." "60," another voice, gruffer, eager. Clay lifted his mallet, a cracked hammer, its handle worn smooth. He slammed it against the board. The thud echoed like a gunshot. "60! Do I hear 70? Sam wailed louder. Hannah rocked him, whispering into his hair. Her own breath came short, chest tightening. She thought of Patrick before the whiskey, before the fever, his laugh, the rough warmth of his cheek. The memory slipped away like water through cracked boards. All that remained was this platform, this crowd, this hammer. 70, someone barked. 75. 80. Each number fell like a lash. The hammer rose and fell, quick, merciless. Hannah's vision blurred. The sun glared so bright the faces melted to shadows. She heard the children cry, the men laugh, the women murmur. Her knees trembled. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Sam. I can't stop this." "I can't stop them, 85, shouted a miner, voice harsh. His eyes slid over Hannah in a way that made her clutch Sam tighter, hiding him against her shoulder. The hammer slammed again. Dust jumped. Clay's thin smile curled. 85! Fine price for such fine company. Do I hear 90? His tone carried mockery, as if the shame itself was part of the sale. The sheriff leaned against a post at the edge of the crowd, thumbs hooked in his belt. He did not move. His gaze stayed fixed on the dirt. Silence, after all, was safer. Silence had no cost. Hannah felt the world narrow to the baby in her arms and the pounding of her heart. She tasted bile in her throat. The boards beneath her swayed. The hammer lifted again, poised to strike down her worth. Then, a sound rolled across the street. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, heavy as thunder moving down a canyon. The crowd stirred, heads turned. Horses tied to the rails stamped uneasily, ears flicking. Dust rose at the far end of Main Street, a blur growing into shape. A rider, massive against the light. The hammer froze mid-air. Clay frowned, squinting. The murmurs spread quick. "Who's that? Never seen a man that size. Looks like a mountain on a horse." Closer he came. Each hoofbeat landed with weight that rattled the loose panes in the saloon windows. The horse, a great bay gelding, glistened with sweat. The rider sat tall, unmoving, like stone carved in motion. His hat brim threw his face in shadow, but the sheer breadth of him made the crowd fall back. Hannah lifted her head. Tears clung to her lashes. Her breath caught, not in hope, not yet, but in raw confusion. The man seemed unreal, a figure out of some tale told by firelight. Could he be deliverance? Or was he just another bidder? Another hand reaching to claim her? The hoofbeats slowed, echoing in the silence. The horse stopped at the edge of the platform. The rider swung down. His boots hit the ground with a thud that shook the boards. Dust swirled. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. He raised his head. Under the brim, his eyes glinted cold, steady. They swept the banker, the crowd, then fixed briefly on Hannah. She felt the weight of that gaze pierce through dust and noise, striking something buried deep inside. But he said nothing. Clay shifted uneasily, his mallet still raised, his voice faltering. "We were nearly done here." The confidence was gone. The crowd leaned forward, caught between fear and fascination. Sam whimpered, pressing his face into Hannah's neck. She cradled him tighter. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She didn't know if this giant was salvation or another form of ruin. The hammer hovered. The heat pressed close. Then the hammer fell. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. And in that instant, Hannah knew she was about to be priced lower than a tired mule. The crack of Tobias Clay's hammer still rang when dust curled upward, stinging Hannah Miller's throat. Sam whimpered against her chest, tiny fists clenching the fabric of her faded dress. The crowd shifted uneasily, boots scraping, spurs jingling, but no voice rose to stop it. Shame clung to the air like smoke. Clay smoothed the front of his black vest, the silver chain of his watch glinting. $85 going once, he called, savoring the words. His pale eyes slid sideways toward the giant who had ridden up moments earlier. The stranger stood silent, a wall of shadow against the hot sun. 85 going twice unless another man here has the coin and courage for 90. The square hushed. Even the dogs in the alley stilled, as if waiting. Hannah's pulse thundered. No bid came. The hammer began to lift again. "Hold!" The word rolled out deep, gravel over stone. The crowd startled, a ripple of murmurs breaking the silence. The stranger stepped forward, boots thudding heavy on the dirt. He stopped at the edge of the platform, his eyes, under the brim of a weathered hat, fixed on Clay with unblinking calm. "If you mean to bid," Clay said quickly, irritation thinly masked by false cheer, "then name your price." The man reached into his coat. Fingers twitched around pistol grips in the crowd. But no weapon appeared. Instead, he set a leather pouch on the banker's table. It landed with a solid thump. The drawstring loosened. Coins spilled gold, bright even in the dusty light. 100, he said simply. Gasps scattered through the onlookers. A rancher whistled low. A miner cursed. A woman pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. $100, nearly double what Clay had pressed for. Enough to buy prime cattle or a sturdy wagon. Clay's lips dampened with the flick of his tongue. He pawed through the coins like a rat nosing grain. "Generous," he said, voice trembling at first, then steadier. "Very generous indeed. But the truth is," he straightened, eyes narrowing with sly light. Patrick Miller's debt stood at 120, with interest, with fees, with lawful adjustment. Yes, 120 murmurs rose again. Hannah felt the words like a knife turning. 70 had taken their land. Now Clay conjured numbers from thin air. Her jaw clenched until her teeth ached. Still no one spoke for her. Silence was the coin of the town. The giant's gaze did not flicker. He reached once more into his vest, withdrew another handful of coins, and let them fall with a sharp, metallic rain. 120, he said. Settled. Not another word. The crowd held its breath. The banker's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to the sheriff leaning by the hitching rail. But the lawman remained still, thumbs hooked in his belt, gaze pointedly fixed elsewhere. Clay swallowed. His voice, when it came, was dry. Very well. 120. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman. The hammer struck. The echo cracked across Main Street. Whispers surged, quick and hot. More than I'd pay for a wagon team. Fool's money. She must be worth it to him. Women tilted bonnets to whisper behind gloved hands. Children tugged sleeves, asking questions no parent answered. Hannah's knees weakened. She pressed Sam tight, his cry muffled against her collarbone. Her heart banged in her chest. She wanted to scream that it made no difference, 85 or 120. She was still a woman sold like tack at an auction. Yet her throat locked. No sound came. The stranger climbed the steps. The boards groaned, protesting his weight. His shadow fell over Hannah. She smelled leather, dust, horse sweat clinging to him. His coat was patched, his boots scarred, but his presence filled the platform. He tipped his hat, just slightly. Ma'am. The word was soft, meant for her alone. Then he turned his gaze to Clay. Our business is done. Clay's throat bobbed. Records must be signed, receipts. The stare he met froze the rest. The stranger's eyes were steel. You've coin in hand. That is record enough. Clay gathered the gold quickly, greed pushing aside pride. His fingers shook as he stacked coins, as though afraid the giant might snatch them back. The stranger extended one vast hand toward Hannah. Calloused, scarred, steady. She froze. To take it was to admit she belonged. To refuse was to stand alone before the jeers of every eye. Sam whimpered, his small body twisting. Hannah's breath broke shallow, her vision swimming. She placed her hand in his. His palm was rough, but warm, strong enough to hold her weight as he guided her down. The crowd parted, murmuring, stepping aside as if before a storm. The sheriff's gaze followed, but no word left his mouth. Silence again was the law. Hannah's boots met dust. She swayed, dizzy. The stranger gathered his horse's reins, looked once at Clay, then said, She leaves with me. Clay nodded too quickly. As the law requires. Hannah stood rooted, clutching Sam, staring at the faces around her neighbors, who had once shared bread, who now turned away. The world resumed its rhythm. The creak of wagons, the clang of spurs, laughter from the saloon. Yet nothing was the same. She had been bought, not rescued, bought. The giant Eli Cartwright, though she did not yet know his name, stood solid as the land itself. His jaw was carved stone, his eyes unreadable beneath shadow. She felt the ground shift beneath her life, as if the hammer's fall had split it in two. A miner spat into the dirt. Hell, I'd have let the banker keep her. A ranch hand muttered, What man pays that for trouble? Their words sliced, but none cut deeper than the silence of those who said nothing. Eli's hand still held hers, steady as an anchor. He released it only when she steadied, then turned, leading his horse forward. His voice, low and final, brushed the dust. Come. And Hannah followed, because there was nothing else left to do. Dust puffed under her worn boots as she stepped into the street, clutching Sam so tightly the baby fussed against her shoulder. The crowd melted back into the saloon's shadows, their whispers trailing after her like burrs on wool. Some eyes gleamed with pity, others with envy, a few with open contempt. Not a single hand reached to help. The giant walked ahead, reins in his fist. His horse, a broad-shouldered bay streaked with sweat, tossed its head, snorting clouds of steam into the hot afternoon. The animal was nearly as intimidating as the man himself. Thick-necked, scar-slashed, built for endurance. Hannah kept her gaze fixed on its hooves, terrified of stumbling, terrified of appearing weak before so many watching eyes. They stopped at the hitching rail outside the Silver Eagle. Laughter leaked from the saloon, sharp with whiskey. The giant turned then, finally meeting her eyes. Up close, she saw him more clearly. Sun-cracked skin, jaw lined with stubble silvering at the edges, blue eyes like mountain ice beneath the shade of his brim. Dust clung to the sweat along his brow, but nothing in his stance sagged. He stood as if the weight of heat, gold, or stairs meant nothing. "Name's Eli Cartwright," he said simply. The words were gravel and wind, carrying no flourish. "Ma'am, you'll come with me." Hannah's mouth was dry. Her arms tightened around Sam until the child whimpered. She forced herself to ask, though her voice cracked, "Why?" Eli looked past her, over the thinning crowd. "Not here." He untied his horse and swung into the saddle with ease despite his massive frame. Then he extended a hand down to her, the hand that had just traded gold for her freedom or her bondage. She hesitated, but when Sam shifted against her, she took it. His grip hauled her up with no effort, settling her before him on the saddle. Gasps rose from the bystanders. A miner jeered, "Bought himself a wife already broke in." Laughter followed, cruel and hollow. Eli's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He pressed his knees to the horse's flanks, and the gelding moved. The crowd parted. No one blocked their way. They rode through the edge of town. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, hammer hanging over the anvil. A woman watering geraniums stiffened, lips thin. Hannah wanted to vanish into the dust, but the saddle leather creaked beneath her, and Sam whimpered again. She rocked him as best she could, whispering nonsense, trying to drown the shame burning her cheeks. Only when Rust Creek's last buildings dwindled behind them did Eli slow. The prairie stretched wide, rolling under the sky's merciless blue. Grass bent in the wind, whispering. Far off, cattle grazed like dark flecks against the horizon. The silence after the town's noise was enormous. "You've questions," Eli said. His voice was quiet now, the words nearly lost to the breeze. Hannah swallowed. "You spent all that gold. For what?" Her tone trembled between accusation and fear. He was silent long enough she thought he might ignore her. Then, "For you not to be sold like stock." His gaze stayed ahead, fixed on the road. "And for the boy not to be raised in debt and shame." The words should have comforted, but Hannah's chest twisted. "That makes us yours, doesn't it? $120 worth." His jaw tightened. "No, debt's paid. You owe me nothing." Hannah studied his profile, the scar along his cheekbone, the grim set of his mouth. He looked carved from stone, but something in his tone flat, almost weary, hinted at a weight carried long before today. She turned her face away, eyes on the horizon. Sam had fallen asleep against her chest, breath even, tiny fist still gripping fabric. For his sake, she stayed silent. But inside, questions coiled like rattlesnakes. Who was Eli Cartwright? Why did he ride into Rust Creek at that exact moment? And what would he demand tomorrow or next week? They reached the outskirts where cottonwoods grew along a creek. Eli drew the horse to a halt in the shade. He swung down, then reached up to lift Hannah as if she weighed nothing. He set her gently on her feet, careful not to jostle Sam. For a moment, his hand lingered at her elbow, then dropped away. "You'll need rest," he said. "There's a boarding house down the road." Safer than the street, Hannah blinked. She had expected him to drag her anywhere he pleased, not offer comfort. "Why not your place?" she asked warily. "Not yet." He loosened the cinch strap, letting the bay breathe. "You don't know me. I don't force trust." The word struck her more than the hammer ever had. She lowered her gaze, ashamed of the relief surging through her. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard with peeling white paint. A woman in a frayed shawl eyed them from the porch, lips pressed tight. But when Eli requested a room, she relented. "Full up," she said, "with cattle buyers in town." "Only one spare," Eli nodded. "She takes it." "I'll take the storeroom," Hannah startled. "But—" He shook his head, cutting her off. "You'll sleep with your boy behind a locked door." His tone carried no argument. Inside, the air smelled of kerosene and old wood. Eli led her to the narrow stairs, handed her the key, and stepped back. Hannah hesitated at the threshold, clutching Sam. She looked over her shoulder. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his posture was rigid, as though holding back something he might never say. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Good," he replied. "Better that than to fear me." With that, he turned, boots creaking as he strode down the hall toward the storeroom. Hannah entered the small room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, trembling, listening to Sam's soft breaths. The bed was narrow, the quilt worn thin, but it was hers for the night. She lowered Sam into the cradle the landlady provided, a drawer lined with cloth, and knelt beside it. Her mind spun. A stranger had paid for her freedom, yet claimed nothing in return. Why? Charity? Debt of honor? Or something darker she could not yet see? The questions crowded her until sleep was impossible. She pressed her palms to her face. "Please," she whispered into the stillness. "Let him mean what he says." Outside, boots thudded faintly on wood. She imagined Eli settling onto a cot in the storeroom, alone with shadows. The thought of his silence pressed close, almost as heavy as the memory of the crowd. For the first time since Patrick's death, Hannah felt the fragile outline of possibility. Not safety, not yet, but perhaps a reprieve. Still, as she lay on the bed with Sam nestled beside her, her last thought before exhaustion pulled her under was bitter. A woman bought for gold cannot be free. Dawn cracked Rust Creek with a chill that crept beneath warped window frames. Hannah stirred, Sam warm against her side, the quilt scratchy on her skin. She blinked at the pale light, disoriented for a moment, then remembered yesterday. The platform, the hammer, the giant who had dropped gold like judgment. She pushed upright, heart lurching. Sam squirmed and fussed until she hushed him close. Outside, boots thudded on floorboards. Then came a knock, deep enough to rattle the latch. Hannah tensed. Her whisper brushed Sam's hair. "Hush now, love." She eased to the door, fingers trembling as she turned the key. Eli Cartwright stood in the hall, his hat-brim shadowed eyes pale as a river in winter. He carried a small sack in one hand, his other resting casually near the pistol at his hip. "You'll want breakfast," he said. No greeting, no courtesy beyond the steady tone. He extended the sack. "Biscuits, jerky. Coffee if you take it downstairs." Hannah took it carefully. "Why?" The word escaped harsher than she meant. Eli studied her face for a moment. "Because you've gone a day without food. And because the boy needs milk." He turned, already stepping away. Panic jolted her. "Wait." His boots paused. "You paid more than anyone ever would," she said. "Why?" For a breath, silence. Then, "Patrick Miller once saved my life." Her lips parted. The name of her dead husband, spoken in that low gravel, rang strange. Eli's gaze shifted past her shoulder, fixed on some memory she could not see. "Shiloh," he said quietly. "Cavalry charge. Mini ball meant for me. Patrick took it in his leg, pulled me out of the mud while bullets rained. I swore I'd pay him back. Yesterday was the only chance I had." Hannah's breath caught. She tightened her hold on Sam. "So you bought me because of him?" "No," Eli said. His voice was rough but steady. "I paid to end Clay's hold. You and the boy are no man's property. Not mine, not his." He touched his hat brim. That's all. He walked down the stairs, leaving her stunned in the doorway. Later that morning, Hannah found him outside the boarding house, tending to his horse. Sunlight struck the dust swirling at his boots. The animal's hide gleamed bronze, scars across its flank like old maps. Eli worked in silence, tightening a strap, checking hooves. Hannah shifted Sam on her hip and stepped nearer. "You mean to leave today?" she said. Eli nodded. "Rust Creek has nothing worth lingering for." "And me?" His gaze lifted. For a long moment, those pale eyes held hers. "You're free to choose. Stay, go. Ride with me if you've nowhere." The words stunned her more than the gold had. Freedom was not a word she expected to hear. "I have no land," she whispered. "No family. No coin. Where would I go?" Eli looked away, toward the endless line of hills. "Then ride. My ranch is 2 days west. Cabin's empty, save me. You'll have roof and food until you decide." Hannah's pulse pounded. Could she trust him? Or was this just another cage, gilded with courtesy? Sam stirred restlessly, his tiny fingers clutching her collar. She looked at the child, then at Eli. "You ask nothing in return?" His jaw hardened. "Your husband saved me. I pay my debts." They left Rust Creek before noon. The town did not stop them. A few eyes followed from porches, from saloon windows. Clay stood outside his bank, pale fingers clutching the watch chain that swung heavy with fresh gold. His thin smile faded when Eli's cold gaze met his. Neither spoke. Then the gelding's hooves struck dust, and the banker shrank back into his doorway. The prairie opened wide. Wagon ruts cut faint scars through grass. The sky stretched, a hard dome of heat. Hannah rode in silence, Sam bundled in her arms. Eli's shadow loomed ahead, steady in the saddle. Each mile put the town further behind, yet the shame clung like burrs. At mid-afternoon they stopped by a creek. Eli watered the horse, then returned with a tin cup. "Drink," he said, handing it to her. She hesitated, then sipped. The water was cold, clean. She gave some to Sam with her fingers, watching his tiny mouth latch hungrily. Eli crouched nearby, elbows on his knees. He spoke without looking at her. "Clay won't trouble you again. The deed's clear. He got his gold." "But he'll tell it," Hannah said bitterly. "He'll tell every soul from here to Cheyenne that I was sold." Eli finally looked at her. "Let them talk. The prairie forgets quick. Only you and the boy carry the truth." The fire in his gaze startled her. She hugged Sam closer, torn between fear and something else she couldn't yet name. That night they reached a wayside shack used by travelers. Its roof sagged, but walls still stood. Eli built a fire in the hearth, sparks rising against the dark. Hannah laid Sam on a blanket near the flames, rocking him until his cries softened. Shadows flickered on the log walls. Eli sat cross-legged by the fire, sharpening his knife. Steel hissed against stone. The sound was steady, rhythmic. Hannah watched him, unease crawling her skin. Finally she spoke. "You could have kept riding. Why stop?" He did not look up. "Because I made a promise to a man dying in the mud, and because no decent man lets a woman and her child be sold like cattle." Her throat tightened. "So this is pity." The knife paused. He slid it back into its sheath, then met her gaze. "No. This is honor." She searched his face, found nothing but blunt truth. Her breath shuddered out. For the first time since Patrick's fever, the weight on her chest eased just slightly. Sam cooed softly, reaching for Eli with tiny hands. Eli stiffened, surprised. Then he extended a finger, letting the child grasp it. His massive hand dwarfed the infant's grip. A flicker of something passed across his weathered features, something almost tender. Hannah saw it, and for a fragile moment, her bitterness cracked. But as she lay down beside Sam, listening to the fire crackle and the wind push against the shack's walls, the thought returned, sharper than ever. Men keep debts in strange ways. Today, Eli Cartwright claimed to free her. Tomorrow, would he call the debt due? Her eyes closed heavy with exhaustion. Sam slept, curled like a kitten. Eli kept silent watch by the fire, the knife glinting faint in his hand. Outside, coyotes yipped at the edge of the prairie. Their calls carried thin on the wind. The night pressed close, but the shack's rough walls held. By dawn, the storm of questions in Hannah's mind had dulled to a weary haze. Sam stirred early, fussing until she nursed him. When the first rim of sun burned the horizon, Eli was already saddling his horse. His movements were quiet, efficient, as if he had spent a lifetime breaking camp before others stirred. "We ride soon," he said. His voice was low, not unkind, but final. Hannah bundled Sam in the shawl, tied her bonnet under her chin, and followed. The prairie wind cut cool against her cheeks. They rode in silence, mile after mile, until the faint outline of Pine Hollow appeared. Half a dozen streets, a church steeple, smoke curling from chimneys. The horses' hooves rang hollow on the boardwalk as they stopped before the boarding house. It was larger than Rust Creek's, paint still holding against the weather, a brass bell glinting at the door. Eli dismounted, then lifted Hannah and Sam down as if they weighed nothing. Inside, lamplight glowed against worn wallpaper. A stout woman behind the counter looked up. Her eyes flicked from Eli's massive frame to Hannah's tired face and the baby in her arms. "Full house," she said briskly. "Cattle buyers in town." Eli nodded. "One room will do." "She takes it." The woman's brows lifted. "And you?" "Storeroom. Cott'll serve." The woman studied him, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." She handed over a key. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked beneath Hannah's boots. She stepped into the room small with a single narrow bed, a washstand, curtains faded from sun. Eli set down the small bundle of supplies he'd purchased at the mercantile. Bread, beans, a tin of condensed milk. "You'll be safe here," he said. He turned toward the door. Hannah caught herself whispering, "Why?" He stopped, his hand on the latch. "Because a woman with a child deserves a locked door." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. That night, Hannah lay awake long after Sam had drifted into sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to faint sounds from the street. The jingle of spurs, laughter spilling from the saloon, the wheeze of a harmonica. Every sound reminded her she was still a stranger in this town, with nothing but her son and a man she did not understand. Morning came with sunlight streaking through thin curtains. Eli appeared at the door with a knock, his broad frame filling the doorway. He carried a tray, eggs, biscuits, coffee. Hannah frowned. "Why give me your meal?" "I've had worse," he said. He set the tray on the table, then stepped back as if the small room were too tight for him. Sam gurgled, reaching toward Eli with chubby hands. To her surprise, Eli extended a finger, letting the infant curl tiny fists around it. Something softened in his eyes, but only for a moment. He cleared his throat. "Eat while it's hot." Later, Hannah ventured downstairs. The boarding house parlor was crowded with men in dusty coats, revolvers slung low, spurs clinking on the wood floor. Their talk was loud, coarse. A deck of cards slapped a table. Coins clinked, voices rose in laughter. Hannah shifted Sam on her hip and tried to pass unseen. But one man, a miner with a scarred jaw, looked up. His gaze lingered too long. "Pretty widow," he said. His voice carried across the room. Clay was right. Worth the coin, heat flushed Hannah's face. She quickened her pace. Before the miner could rise, Eli's shadow fell over him. His presence sucked the noise from the room. "You'll keep your tongue," Eli said. The words were calm, but iron underlay each syllable. The miner's smirk faltered. He held up his hands. "No offense meant." Eli's gaze lingered until the man dropped his eyes. Then he turned, guiding Hannah toward the stairs. "Best keep to your room," he murmured. Hannah's breath shook. "I told you, this is no different than being owned." He stopped halfway up the stairs, turned to her. For the first time, Anger sparked in his eyes. I bought your debt, not you. Learn the difference. The words struck hard. Hannah bit her lip, holding Sam tighter, and hurried past him up the steps. That night, when the hall quieted, she lit a lamp and sat by the window. The street outside was still alive, men staggering, lanterns swinging, boots echoing. She thought of Rust Creek, of the jeers, of Clay's hammer. She thought of Eli's gold spilling across the banker's table. Sam stirred in his makeshift cradle. Hannah bent to tuck the blanket tighter, whispering, I'll find us a way. I swear it, the lamp guttered. She turned and saw Eli's shadow in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, silent, unreadable. You should sleep, he said. I can't, she admitted. Not when I don't know what tomorrow brings. His eyes softened, though only slightly. Tomorrow brings choices. That's more than you had yesterday, she wanted to argue, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she blew out the lamp. Darkness folded around them, broken only by moonlight through the window. The next morning, Eli saddled his horse early. Hannah, carrying Sam, watched from the doorway. The bay stamped and snorted, eager for the trail. Eli glanced up at her, then at the child. We ride at first light, he said. If you choose. Hannah clutched Sam close, torn between fear and the faint glimmer of something else, a fragile thread of trust she did not yet want to name. She hesitated, then whispered, Where? West, Eli said, to my land. To quiet. The word quiet lingered in the air like a promise, like a threat. Hannah turned it over in her mind as she held Sam close and followed Eli out of Pine Hollow. The town shrank behind them, saloon lamps fading, church steeple swallowed by distance, the last whistle of a blacksmith's hammer dying on the wind. The prairie opened wide, an ocean of grass rippling under a bruised sky. Eli rode slightly ahead, his broad back straight in the saddle, hat pulled low. The gelding moved steady, hooves sinking into soft dust. Hannah's mare followed reluctantly, ears flicking at flies. Sam dozed against her chest, lulled by the sway. All day they rode, past weathered fence posts leaning like drunks, past a broken wagon wheel bleached silver in the sun, past cattle skulls picked clean and left to grin from the roadside. Each relic whispered of lives ground down by debt, drought, or whiskey. Hannah wondered if her name would have been another story told in saloons, that widow sold cheap with her babe. Near dusk, clouds rolled heavy. The air turned sharp, metallic. Eli raised a hand and pointed toward a stand of cottonwoods by a shallow creek. There, a hunting shack slouched against the wind, logs weather-dark, roof patched with tin. Smoke stains streaked the stone chimney. Inside was dry, though dust coated every plank. Eli set about building a fire with the efficiency of long habit. He stacked split wood, struck flint, coaxed sparks into flame. Soon, orange light pulsed against rough walls, pushing shadows into corners. Hannah sat on the cot, Sam bundled in her shawl, watching him. The way his scar caught firelight, the set of his jaw, the silence that clung to him. You said quiet, she finally murmured. Is this what you meant? Eli stirred the flames with an iron poker. Quiet's where a man can hear his own thoughts without someone shouting price tags over them. The bitterness in his tone surprised her. She held Sam tighter. You've lived like this long? Since the war, he said. He leaned back on his heels, eyes on the fire. Shiloh. Cold mud, smoke thick enough to choke, cannon tearing men apart faster than they could scream. Your husband pulled me out when a horse went down on me. I owed him my life, Hannah froze. You knew Jacob? Eli nodded once. Not well. Just enough to know he was braver than most. I carried the weight of his voice in my head when I wanted to quit. Men like him keep others alive long after they're gone. Her throat tightened. Jacob's face flickered in memory. Laughing, foolish with cards, tender when Sam first wailed in the night. She swallowed hard. He was not always brave. He gambled. He left debts I didn't know about. Eli looked at her then, the blue of his eyes sharp under his hat brim. A man can be both. Brave in one moment, weak in the next. Doesn't cancel either. Hannah blinked against tears. She had carried Jacob's failings like stones in her apron, too heavy to put down, too sharp to forget. Yet Eli's words made them feel less damning. The fire popped. Sam whimpered, then quieted when she brushed his cheek. Silence pressed in again, thick, broken only by the hiss of sap in the wood. "You think this is charity," Eli said suddenly. "It isn't. This is debt. I pay what I owe, nothing more." The bluntness stung. Hannah looked down at Sam, then back at him. "And when the debt's paid?" Eli's jaw flexed. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a hunk of bread and a tin of beans. He set them on the table, movements heavy, deliberate. "Eat, then sleep. Tomorrow we ride farther west," but the question hung between them, unanswered. Later, after Sam had finally drifted into slumber and the fire burned low, Hannah found herself watching Eli again. He sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling wood with a hunting knife. Each shaving curled away like pale ribbon, falling to the boards. His hands were huge, scarred, yet precise. "You don't speak much," she said softly. He shrugged. "Words cost. Too many cheapen a man." She considered this, then whispered, "And yet one promise can save a life." His knife paused. He glanced at her, expression unreadable, then returned to carving. For a long time they sat in silence, two strangers bound by another man's shadow, firelight flickering over them like restless ghosts. Hannah thought of Pine Hollow's crowded parlor, the miner's leer, Eli's sudden defense. He claimed debt, not kindness, but she had seen something flicker in his eyes, something he would not name. The storm outside finally broke. Rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled the loose tin. Eli set the carving aside and stood, broad shoulders blocking the firelight for a moment. "Best get what sleep you can. Creek'll swell by morning. Trail will be harder." Hannah lay back on the cot, Sam warm against her. She closed her eyes, though wakefulness clung. Her thoughts circled Jacob's debts, Clay's gavel, Eli's gold, this shack in the storm. Debt, debt, debt. Always men's choices, always her price. She turned her face to the wall and whispered so low only the dark might hear. "Can honor feed a child through winter?" Near midnight, she woke to footsteps. The fire had burned down, embers glowing red. Eli stood at the door, lantern in hand, scanning the night. His other hand rested on his revolver. "What is it?" Hannah asked, voice hushed. He didn't turn. "Coyotes, or men, hard to tell by sound." Go back to sleep, but she did not. She lay there listening to the storm, to Sam's soft breaths, to Eli's steady presence at the threshold. For the first time since the auction block, fear did not consume her. It lingered, yes, but under it was something else. An unfamiliar sense of safety in the presence of a man who claimed he owed her nothing beyond a debt. And as dawn began to bleed gray into the shack, Hannah knew the firelight confession had carved something deeper than honor. The air smelled of wet wood and ash. Rain still dripped from the roof in slow taps. Sam stirred against her chest, fists opening and closing as if grasping dreams. Eli was already outside. She heard the scrape of hooves, the grunt of horses stamping mud from their legs. When she stepped to the doorway, shawl pulled tight, she saw him bent against the wind, a mountain of a man among the cottonwoods. He rubbed down the gelding with brisk strokes, steam rising from the horse's back. His coat was soaked dark, hat brim shedding drops. The prairie beyond lay washed clean, but clouds still crouched heavy over the horizon. The creek had swollen, brown water surging fast. Hannah's stomach tightened. Travel would be treacherous. Inside, Eli spread supplies across the table. A map smudged from years of folding, dried jerky, a tin cup, a rifle cleaned to a dull sheen. His movements were clipped, economical, as though he had learned long ago that hesitation could cost a man his life. "We ride at noon," he said. His voice carried no doubt, only command. Hannah touched the edge of the map. "Across that water?" His gaze flicked to her, then to Sam nestled in her arms. "If it drops enough. Otherwise, we hole up. But staying means risk, too. Folks pass by, see smoke. Wonder who hides here." The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered Clay's sneer, the miner's eyes, the crowd's silence. Safety was fragile as eggshell. By mid-morning, the storm returned. Wind howled down the valley, slamming the shack with invisible fists. Rain lashed sideways, rattling the tin roof like musket fire. Eli shoved the door closed, dropped the bar across it. The inside darkened to a flicker of fire and lantern light. Thunder cracked. Sam cried out, startled. Hannah rocked him, whispering nonsense words. But her own pulse thudded too fast. She saw Eli glance at them, his jaw tight. He dragged another log to the hearth, sparks spitting as it caught. Then he knelt by the cot, eyes level with the baby. "Easy, little fella," he murmured, voice gentler than Hannah expected. Sam hiccuped, blinked at the giant shadow, then quieted. Eli's huge hand hovered near but didn't touch, as if afraid of breaking something so small. Lightning lit the cracks in the wall. Through the flash, Hannah caught a glimpse of Eli's scar again, slashing down from temple to jaw. She wondered how many storms of lead and fire he had stood through, and why he still flinched when holding a child. The hours dragged. Rain hammered, wind keened through the eaves. At one point, the door shook so violently, Hannah thought someone tried to break it down. Eli rose in an instant, revolver drawn, body between her and the door. But it was only the gale. Still, the sight of his massive frame braced in silence burned into her memory. Later, as dusk seeped in, Eli set his rifle on the table. He rubbed his temple, eyes shadowed. "Never liked storms," he muttered. "Reminds me too much of cannon fire." Hannah looked at him, really looked. The giant cowboy everyone whispered about in Rust Creek was not iron. He was flesh, worn thin by memories. She wanted to speak, to offer some balm, but words felt brittle. Instead, she laid Sam in the cot and quietly set bread on the table, slicing it with the small knife Jacob once carried. The act itself was answer enough. They were two souls surviving the same storm. The night deepened. Rain slowed but did not stop. The shack felt suspended between worlds, a fragile box of firelight adrift in roaring dark. Hannah dozed in the chair, head lolling, until Sam whimpered again. She reached for him, but Eli was quicker. His massive hands lifted the child with surprising ease. Sam squirmed, tiny fists pressing against the man's chest. Eli stood still, letting the boy's weight settle. Then, slowly, his shoulders eased. Hannah saw something shift in his face. Not fear, not pain, but a tremor of awe. "You've got his eyes," Eli whispered, so low Hannah almost missed it. Her breath caught. "Whose?" "Jacob's," he said. His thumb traced the air near Sam's cheek, not touching. "Back at Shiloh, in the smoke, he looked at me like that. Steady, certain. Pulled me out of the muck and cursed me for hesitating." I never forgot Hannah's throat closed. The storm outside raged, but in that instant, another storm broke open inside her. Grief colliding with gratitude, bitterness tangling with mercy. Sam yawned, then nestled against Eli's chest as if the great heartbeat there was lullaby enough. The giant stood rigid, as though afraid to move, until Hannah reached out and took her son back. "Honor doesn't end with death," Eli said hoarsely. "It carries. That's why you're here. Why I couldn't let them sell you." The words hung heavy, filled with more than debt. Hannah felt them settle into her bones. She wanted to ask what else lay behind them, but thunder cracked again, silencing all but the storm. By midnight, the gale had begun to break. Stars blinked weak through torn clouds. Eli opened the door and stepped out. The air smelled sharp, pine and wet earth. Hannah followed, shawl tight, Sam warm against her shoulder. The world glittered, rain pooled silver on grass, the swollen creek shining like steel. The mountains loomed dark, their peaks lost in cloud. For a moment, the land felt reborn, washed of dust and cruelty. Eli stood tall against that horizon, silent as stone. Then he said, "Tomorrow we move, before the water drops, before Clay sends someone sniffing." Hannah nodded. She knew the banker would not let go easily. Men like him never did. But under the bruised sky, with Eli's shadow steady beside hers, she felt the faintest thread of resolve wind through her fear. The dawn that followed was startlingly clear. Blue vault stretched wide, every blade of grass jeweled with drops of rain. The shack smelled of wet wood and smoke, the storm's memory still clinging to its walls. Sam cooed softly in the cot, fists batting the air, as if already fighting for a place in this world. Eli moved with restless purpose. He saddled the horses, checked the wagon's wheels, and repacked supplies with the quiet focus of a man who had crossed too many hostile miles to trust in calm. His coat hung heavy from the night's soaking, but his hands scarred and thick as timber handled gear with care. Hannah stepped outside, shawl drawn, Sam balanced against her hip. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine washed clean. Eli glanced over, and for the first time in days, a faint smile bent his mouth. "Clear skies," he said. She followed his gaze. The sun burned away cloud tatters, light spilling across the prairie. It felt almost like mercy. By midday they had traveled far from the shack. Wagon wheels squelched through mud, horses snorting steam. Hannah kept Sam nestled in a sling, her body sore but steadied by the rhythm of the road. Each jolt reminded her of the auction block, yet distance dulled the sting. When Eli finally called a halt near a rise scattered with cottonwoods, Hannah was grateful. He led the horses to water, then returned with a small sack. She watched, curious, as he crouched by the fire ring and struck flint. Soon smoke curled, flames catching. From the sack he drew oats, a dented tin cup, a small pot. He poured water, stirred with the awkwardness of a man unaccustomed to domestic tasks. His brow furrowed as though facing an enemy line. Hannah couldn't help it, her lips curved. "You've never made porridge before?" Eli shot her a glance. "I've eaten it. Didn't say I cooked it." He stirred again, shoulders stiff. The mixture clumped, hissed, stuck to the bottom. Hannah shifted Sam to one arm, stepped forward, and reached for the spoon. "Here." But Eli didn't release it. For a heartbeat, they both held the wooden handle, firelight catching his eyes. Something passed there, defiance, then concession. He let go. Hannah stirred with practiced ease, breaking lumps, thinning with more water. Soon the smell turned warm, nutty, inviting. Sam squirmed, sensing food. Eli watched, silent. His massive frame hunched, hat brim shadowing his face. Finally he muttered, "Can't say I ever learned the small things. Only how to march, fight, mend tack, break horses. Not this," Hannah looked up. "Small things keep children alive." And men too, he absorbed that, gaze fixed on the bubbling pot. When she filled a tin cup with the soft porridge and blew across its surface, Sam reached with tiny hands. She fed him carefully, murmuring, "Slow, my love." Eli's eyes followed every spoonful, as though the act itself was revelation. When Sam drifted into milk-drunk sleep, Hannah offered the spoon to Eli. "Taste." He hesitated, then leaned forward. The spoon looked absurd in his hand, dwarfed by calloused fingers. He tried, chewed slowly, swallowed. "Well?" she asked. His mouth curved the barest fraction. "Better than jerky." She laughed, a sound startling in its brightness. It startled her too. She hadn't heard her own laughter since Jacob's last card game, long before debts smothered joy. The sound faded quickly, but Eli's glance lingered, as if memorizing it. The afternoon passed in a gentler rhythm. Eli mended tack while Hannah rinsed cloths in the creek. They spoke little, but silence no longer pressed like stone. Instead, it carried weight of something unspoken yet alive. At one point, Sam fussed, fists balled. Eli set aside his work and, without asking, lifted the baby. His hands were uncertain but steady. He bounced the boy awkwardly, muttering under his breath. Sam gurgled, then let out a bubbling laugh. Hannah froze. Sam had laughed before, but never so free. She turned, water dripping from her fingers, and saw her son grinning up at Eli Cartwright as though he'd found the world's safest fortress. Eli chuckled low, deep in his chest, the sound rolling like distant thunder yet gentle. He caught Hannah watching and cleared his throat, shifting as if embarrassed. Guess he doesn't mind rough hands. Her heart twisted. Or maybe he trusts what's beneath them. Their eyes held a moment too long. Then Eli turned away, rocking Sam until the boy's eyelids drooped. That evening, they camped beneath the cottonwoods. The fire crackled low. Crickets sawed from the grass. Hannah stitched a tear in her shawl, needle flashing, while Eli sharpened his knife. Sam slept in the blanket roll between them. Breath soft, steady. Hannah broke the silence. You've been alone a long time. Eli's whetstone slowed. Long enough. Doesn't it weigh? He lifted the knife, examined the edge. Solitude's lighter than burying more names. But sometimes, yes, his honesty brushed something raw inside her. She remembered nights in Rust Creek when whispers branded her debtor's widow, when she rocked Sam alone, praying anyone might stand with her. She met Eli's gaze across the fire. Quiet can be crueler than noise. He didn't answer, but the knife lowered, and his eyes did not leave hers. The sky deepened to violet. Stars blinked alive, one by one. Sam shifted, murmured in sleep. Hannah set her sewing aside and pulled the blanket higher over him. When she looked back, Eli was still watching. "What?" she asked softly. He shook his head, a faint crease at his mouth. "Nothing. Just—" He gestured to the fire, the night, them. "Not what I pictured." Feels steadier, she understood. For the first time since the gavel struck, since gold clattered on wood, she too felt a hint of steadiness. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The fire burned low. Hannah leaned back against her saddle, eyes heavy. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Eli's hulking shadow bent toward Sam, adjusting the blanket with hands careful as prayer. Dawn lifted pale over the cottonwoods, dragging gold across wet grass. Birds stitched the silence with quick, nervous calls. Hannah woke stiff, shawl damp with dew, Sam warm in the crook of her arm. Eli was already moving, cinching saddle straps, smoke curling from the rekindled fire where coffee simmered in a blackened pot. They ate in quiet biscuits gone hard, softened with coffee, jerky torn with teeth. Then Eli packed their gear, movement steady as always. He didn't speak of the road ahead, but Hannah felt his unease in the way his jaw worked, the way he scanned the horizon as though expecting eyes. By midday, the wagon creaked toward Pine Hollow, a town larger than Rust Creek, but brighter. Whitewashed clapboard stores lined the main street. A church bell rang noon. Bunting fluttered in summer wind, red and blue strips snapping. Children darted with wooden hoops. The air carried the smell of roasting pork, cider, horses. Hannah stiffened. After Rust Creek, any crowd felt dangerous. She shifted Sam closer. Eli walked beside the wagon, hand on the reins, head bent under his wide brim. He looked carved from stone, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. The square throbbed with life. Fiddles sawed a reel, boots stamped dust into the air. Women in bright calico spun with partners, laughter sharp as bells. It should have felt safe. Instead, Hannah's skin prickled. Then she heard it. Woman's voice, smooth, lilting. Eli Cartwright. I'll be damned, Eli froze. A figure stepped from the crowd, Rebecca James. Blonde hair pinned neat, blue ribbons trailing. Her smile cut wide, eyes fixed on Eli with something too familiar. "You didn't write," she said, tilting her head. Not once in 2 years. Hannah's chest tightened. Eli touched his hat brim. Rebecca. His voice was flat, unreadable. Rebecca's gaze slid, landing on Hannah, on Sam nestled in her arms. Her brows lifted, surprise sharpening into curiosity. And who might this be? Hannah swallowed. Hannah Miller. Widow Rebecca's smile turned knowing. Widow. I see, she let the word linger. Then to Eli. You never could stand still, could you? Always chasing horizons, never roots. And now, her glance at Hannah again. You bring shadows trailing after you. The music behind them quickened, fiddles clawing faster, boots striking louder, as if mocking the sudden silence between the three. Hannah felt heat climb her neck. She hated the way Rebecca's words coiled, soft but cutting. Hated more the flicker of guilt on Eli's face. Rebecca stepped closer. Have you shown her the falls? You used to take me there, remember? Said it was the one place in these hills where the world stopped clawing. Eli's jaw hardened. That was another time. But the falls don't change. Her smile stayed, but her eyes were knives. Funny how some things stay and some don't. Hannah looked down at Sam, kissing his hair to hide the tremor in her lip. The fiddles ended on a shout, cheers rising. Around them, the town spun careless, but in Hannah's chest, the air curdled. The afternoon dragged with forced courtesies. Mrs. Caldwell pressed pie into Hannah's hands, cooed over Sam. Men clapped Eli's back, voices too loud, calling him old soldier, giant rider, loner with a ranch of stone. Everywhere Hannah walked, she felt eyes, some curious, some sharp, but always, at the edge of vision, Rebecca lingered, laughing with neighbors, turning when Eli spoke, smiling like she knew more than Hannah ever would. By dusk, lanterns lit, strings of them swaying over the square. A bonfire roared, sparks scattering against deepening sky. Couples danced again, shadows weaving long. Mrs. Caldwell urged Hannah to join. Hannah shook her head, retreating to a bench with Sam asleep in her arms. She watched. She told herself she was content to watch. Then Rebecca claimed Eli's hand. He hesitated. But the crowd pushed, music pulled, and soon his tall frame was swallowed by dancers. Hannah's breath hitched. The firelight caught Eli's face, stern, restrained, but present. Rebecca spun close, ribbons brushing his sleeve. Hannah's stomach knotted. She turned away, pressing Sam tighter. The night swirled with laughter and fiddle shrieks. Her shawl felt thin as paper. When at last the music ended, she dared glance back. Eli was already striding toward her, expression grim. He crouched, voice low. We leave at first light. Because of her? Hannah asked before she could stop herself. Eli's eyes flickered. Because quiet doesn't last in towns, and shadows talk. Back at the wagon, while Sam stirred and whimpered, Hannah tucked the blanket around him, fingers shaking. She could still see Rebecca's hand on Eli's arm, hear her voice. You used to take me there. As the wagon rolled into the dark edge of Pine Hollow, the fiddles still echoed. Hannah bit her lip until copper filled her mouth. She wanted to ask Eli everything. What Rebecca meant, what history bound them, whether she was just another shadow following a man who belonged elsewhere. But she stayed silent. The only sound was wagon wheels crunching gravel, horses breathing hard, and somewhere beyond the pines, the faint rush of unseen water. By dawn, the town of Pine Hollow was only a smear of smoke behind them. Eli urged the horses hard, not looking back once. Hannah rocked Sam in her arms, heart heavy with questions she dared not voice. Rebecca's words clung like burrs. He used to take me there. The thought soured even the clean morning air. The trail wound through foothills, cottonwoods thinning to fir. The peaks ahead loomed sharp, capped with lingering snow though summer sun burned. Eli pointed toward them. We'll cut through that valley. Quicker to the ranch, Hannah nodded, though her throat felt tight. They reached the ranch by midday. The cabin crouched against the slope, chimney scarred from old smoke, a corral stretching empty beside the barn. It should have felt like haven. Instead, Hannah sensed the weight of Rebecca's shadow still pressing from behind. Eli busied himself unloading supplies. His silence was ironclad. He moved with the controlled strength of a man trying to outpace his own thoughts. Hannah settled Sam inside the cabin, laying him in a cradle Eli had built from pine boards. The baby gurgled, reaching for sunlight that spilled through the small window. That evening, Eli sat on the porch, sharpening a knife. Sparks flared with each stroke. Hannah rocked Sam in the doorway, the night wind brushing her hair. She wanted to ask about Rebecca, about the falls, about what tethered Eli's silence. But the knife sang sharp, and the words stayed in her chest. At dawn, Eli saddled his horse. "North fence is down. I'll mend it." Back by sundown, Hannah stepped onto the porch, shawl pulled close. "Alone?" He adjusted the cinch. "Always." Then softer. "Keep the fire lit." She watched him ride off, dust curling behind. Sam stirred in her arms, sensing the change. Hannah whispered to the child, though her own voice trembled, "He'll be back." The day stretched slow. Hannah gathered eggs from the hens, fetched water from the creek, baked flatbread with what flour remained. She tried to weave rhythm into the hours, but each sound outside the snap of a twig, the caw of a crow made her start. Afternoon slid into dusk. The sky bruised purple, shadows pooling long. Sam fussed, restless. Hannah rocked him, heart thudding harder with each minute. By nightfall, Eli had not returned. She stood at the window, staring toward the black tree line. The lamp flickered at her elbow. Sam whimpered, then quieted when she pressed him to her shoulder. The silence of the ranch yard was too complete. No hoofbeats, no giant silhouette cresting the rise. Her mind churned. A fall from his horse, an ambush by men Clay had sent, a wild beast in the timber. Every thought tightened her chest. At last she could bear it no longer. She laid Sam gently in the cradle, then froze. She could not leave him. Not alone, not in this cabin. Her fingers trembled as she lifted him back into the sling across her chest. In the barn she fumbled with tack, hands clumsy in lamplight. The gray mare shifted, sensing her unease. Hannah whispered steady words, though her breath shook. She had never saddled alone. The straps tangled, the cinch slipped. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, then forced herself to start again. At last the saddle held. She mounted, skirts heavy, Sam bundled close. In one hand she gripped the lantern, flame quivering. The other clutched the reins. The mare snorted, then stepped into the night. The trail north wound narrow between firs. Moonlight sifted through clouds, faint as milk. Wind rattled branches, carrying scents of wet earth and pitch. Hannah's lantern swung, casting jagged shadows. Her heart pounded with every hoofbeat. Sam shifted in sleep, cheek pressed to her collarbone. She whispered, "Hush, little one." "We'll find him," an owl screeched. Hannah jolted. The mare tossed her head. She tightened her grip, forcing breath steady. She rode on, past boulders slick with moss, past a ravine where water foamed pale in moonlight, past the ghostly outline of elk moving silent between trees. Each mile stretched longer than the last. Then a sound. Hoofbeats, not her own. She froze, lantern high. From the darkness ahead, a horse nickered low. Relief surged until doubt followed. Friend or foe? Hannah? Her breath caught. The lantern flared across a massive figure astride a stallion. Eli. Mud streaked his coat, hair plastered damp. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "What in God's name?" He urged his horse forward. "You rode out? At night? With the child?" Hannah could not answer at first. Relief broke her knees, but the saddle held her upright. She clutched Sam, whispering, "You didn't come back." Eli drew alongside, staring at the bundle on her chest, then at her pale face. The storm in his eyes softened. "You came for me." She nodded, tears hot. For a long moment, the forest hushed. Only the creek muttered, Only the horses blew steam. Eli reached across, his hand closing over hers on the reins. "No one's ever done that," he said quietly. "No one's ever waited." The words lodged deep in Hannah's chest. The fear, the ride, the dark, all of it seemed worth this single admission. Sam stirred, whimpered. Eli's hand brushed the sling, careful as though touching holy cloth. He looked at Hannah again, eyes burning with something she couldn't name. "Let's go home," he said. They turned south, lantern swinging, moonlight carving their path. Hannah's heart still raced, but beside Eli's hulking figure, steadiness seeped back. She had faced the night, had chosen not to wait behind locked doors. For the first time since Rust Creek, she felt less like a price on a block, more like a woman who could decide her own road. The lantern's glow swung wide as they rode back through the trees, Eli's stallion pacing beside her mare. Sam slept against her chest, lulled by the rhythm of hooves. Above them, the moon rode high, carving silver lines through the branches. When the cabin came into view, firelight pulsed faint behind the window. Relief washed Hannah so hard her throat ached. She dismounted stiffly, nearly stumbling. Eli's big hand steadied her at the waist, warm even through cloth. For a moment they stood close, breath mingling in the cold air, until Sam whimpered and broke the spell. Inside, the hearth glowed with low coals. Eli stoked it, coaxing flames alive. Hannah laid Sam in the cradle, smoothing his hair. The cabin's stillness pressed around them. No fiddles, no jeers, no banker's gavel. Only the crackle of fire and the faint whistle of wind through the eaves. Eli poured water into a pot, set it over the flame. His shoulders looked heavier than usual, as if he carried more than gear and memories. Hannah watched him, gathering courage. "You didn't come back," she whispered. He turned, eyes shadowed under his hat brim. "Fence was worse than I reckoned." Horse bolted. "Took me hours," his voice roughened. "Didn't think you'd ride out." "I couldn't wait," she said. Her hands twisted in her shawl. "Not knowing if you were hurt. Not knowing if Sam would—" She broke off. Eli's knife lay on the table, catching firelight. He set it aside, crossed the room in 3 strides. His size filled the space, but his gaze was not iron, it was raw. "No one ever waited," he said low. "Not after the war. Not on the trail. I'd ride out, ride back, didn't matter. Empty every time. Until you," Hannah's breath hitched. She wanted to look away, but his words rooted her. The wind outside howled sudden, rattling the shutters. Snow hissed against the roof, sharp as sand. A storm had slipped from the mountains, silent until it struck. Eli moved to the door, bolted it against the gust. Cold seeped through the logs, tightening the air. When he turned back, Hannah was still watching. Firelight flickered over his scar, over eyes that seemed both guarded and pleading. "Why me?" she asked before she could stop. "Why save me?" His chest rose slow. "Because Jacob once saved me. Because you didn't deserve to be sold like a mule. Because—" His hand curled into a fist. "Because I wanted to." The admission hung heavy. Hannah's throat worked. "And now? What am I to you now? Debt? Duty?" Eli stepped closer. Each word came like a hammer striking wood. "Not debt, not duty. More." The wind slammed the cabin, shutters banging. Sam stirred in his cradle but did not wake. Hannah's heart thundered louder than the storm. Eli's hand lifted, rough knuckles brushing her cheek. The touch was hesitant, reverent. She should have pulled back. Instead, she leaned in. For the first time since her husband's death, warmth flooded her without guilt. Eli bent, lips brushing hers with a tenderness that belied his bulk. It was not the kiss of a man staking claim. It was the kiss of someone afraid to break what he had just found. Hannah trembled. Tears blurred her sight. The storm outside roared, but in that kiss she felt something steadier than walls, stronger than debt. When they broke apart, Eli's breath was ragged. "I've wanted since Pine Hollow, since before, but I held it. Her fingers rose to his face, tracing the scar. And her voice faltered, I thought love was finished, buried with Jacob. But tonight, riding into the dark, I prayed you'd be alive. Not for debt. For me, Eli closed his eyes, forehead resting against hers. Then let me say it plain. I love you, Hannah Miller. You and the boy. More than I can put to words. Her chest ached, but with release, not burden. I love you too, she whispered, though it frightens me. He pulled back just enough to search her face. To hell with fear. Snow drove harder against the walls. The cabin trembled, yet Hannah felt only stillness, as if the world had paused to witness. Eli reached into his coat, pulled a small pouch. From it he drew a ring plain gold, worn with years. It was my mother's, he said. His voice shook for the first time she had heard. I'd be honored if you wore it. Hannah's hand shook as he slid the band onto her finger. It fit as though it had waited all along. Her eyes filled. Eli. But he silenced her with another kiss, deeper, steadier, firelight painting them in warmth while the blizzard clawed outside. When they parted, he murmured, We'll weather more storms. Together, Hannah glanced at the cradle, where Sam slept undisturbed. Together, she echoed. The ring glimmered in the fire's glow, a promise no storm could erase. Outside, the wind clawed the cabin walls, but inside, warmth held steady. Hannah sat close to the hearth. Sam curled asleep in the cradle, while Eli's hulking frame rested on the stool opposite. His eyes never left her hand where the ring caught flame and shadow. By dawn, the storm had eased. The world beyond the door lay muffled, blanketed in white. Trees bent under snow, the creek frozen to silence. Hannah stepped out with Sam wrapped tight against her chest, breath rising in plumes. Eli shoveled a path, each thrust of his spade carving order out of chaos. He paused, leaning on the handle, snow clinging to his beard. Montana winter, he said. Cruel but honest. You know where you stand, Hannah looked around. At the mountains sharp and eternal, at the sky stretched endless, at the cabin crouched solid against the drift. For the first time she felt she might belong here. Inside, Eli dragged in pine boughs, stacking them near the hearth. Hannah hung wet clothes by the fire, humming low as Sam batted at the air. The domestic rhythm felt strange, like wearing another woman's dress, but not unwelcome. That evening, Eli brought in a small pine tree, set it upright in the corner. Its branches were crooked, needles shedding, but Hannah gasped all the same. For Christmas, Eli muttered, almost shy. Together they decorated with what little they had. Bits of ribbon Hannah had saved, pine cones dipped in flour paste, a string of popcorn she threaded while Sam babbled. Eli carved a tiny horse from scrap wood, set it beneath the branches. The tree looked humble, but in that humble glow, Hannah's chest swelled. On Christmas morning, Eli handed her a wrapped bundle, awkward as a schoolboy. Inside lay a small sketched charcoal on scrap parchment of her rocking Sam by firelight. You drew this? She whispered. He shifted, uneasy. Picked it up again. Helps keep my hands busy, her eyes stung. She reached across, squeezed his rough hand. It's beautiful. Later, Hannah pulled a scarf she had knitted from coarse yarn, draped it over his shoulders. He touched it reverently, as though it were silk. Best gift I've had, he said. Sam squealed with delight over the carved animals Eli had made. Bear, cow, sheep, each smoothed to a shine. He clutched them tight, gumming the edges, as Hannah laughed softly. Winter days settled into rhythm. Eli rose before dawn, breaking ice on troughs, feeding cattle huddled in the south pasture. Hannah baked bread, preserved dried apples, mended shirts stiff with wear. At night they sat by the fire, Eli carving, Hannah sewing, Sam crawling clumsily between. It was not grand, but it was theirs. One evening, While wind howled outside, Eli leaned back, pipe unlit in his mouth. "I thought I saved you in Rust Creek," he said. His voice was rough, almost lost in the storm. Hannah looked up from her sewing. "You did." He shook his head. "No. Truth is, you saved me. 10 years I rode alone. Thought that was life. Dust, horses, no home worth the name. Then you and the boy." His gaze softened. "You made this place more than walls. You gave it breath." Hannah's needle paused. Words pressed her chest, fragile yet sure. "And you gave us safety when no one else would. Debt or no debt, Eli, you gave us a chance to hope again." Their eyes held across the fire, steadier than any vow. Spring crept down the mountains. Snow melted into rushing streams. Shoots of green pierced soil, stubborn and alive. Sam took his first steps on the packed dirt floor, tumbling into Eli's waiting arms. The giant laughed, lifting him high until squeals filled the rafters. Hannah watched from the doorway, heart aching with joy. She thought of Rust Creek, the gavel, the shame, the weight of eyes. How far she had come, how far they all had. Neighbors from Pine Hollow began to visit, bringing seed potatoes, flour, gossip. Some looked curious at Hannah, remembering the auction whispers. But most nodded kindly, eyes catching on the ring glinting on her hand. Mrs. Caldwell arrived one afternoon with jars of preserves and a smile wide as her apron. "Knew you'd do right, Eli Cartwright," she said. "Took long enough." Eli flushed, ducking his head, but Hannah saw the pride hidden in his eyes. One evening, as twilight bled over the highlands, Eli led Hannah to the ridge above the creek. The land stretched wide pines marching to the horizon, peaks bathed in honeyed light. "This is it," he said. "Home." Hannah took his hand. Sam toddled between them, clutching their fingers. She looked out across the valley, across the wild expanse that had once felt cruel. Now it felt like promise. She thought of Jacob, of debts unpaid. She thought of Clay, of voices that had tried to price her lower than a mule. And she thought of Eli Giant, scarred, stubborn, gentle. "Home," she echoed. The word rang true, carried by wind, rooted in earth. Hannah had walked from shame on an auction block to the warmth of a firelit cabin, from fear of being sold like a mule to the steady ring of a promise on her finger. Eli had journeyed from solitude carved by war to a life remade by love, from silence haunted by ghosts to the laughter of a child he now called son. Together they learned that debts can bind strangers, but hope can turn them into family. One evening, when the storm had passed and Sam toddled toward the door, he fell and scraped his knee. Hannah rushed, but Eli was there first, kneeling, his massive hands trembling as he blew gently on the wound, whispering, "Easy, little man." The boy's tears stopped, replaced by a giggle, and in that small moment Hannah knew no gavel could measure the worth of tenderness. Yet beneath this ending rests a question. In a world that prices people by debt, beauty, or strength, what is the true measure of a person's worth? What they can give or simply who they are? If this story stirred something in you, tell us in the comments what you think. Subscribe to follow more tales beneath the western sky, and share it so others may ride alongside Hannah, Eli, and Sam. For life's message is simple but eternal. Love is not bought with gold. It is built each day in the quiet courage to care.